Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. Today I will be reviewing this wonderful biography of Yoko Ono, which I just recently finished reading, by David Sheff. You might recognize his name. He did the famous very long Playboy interview with Yoko and John back in September of 1980, and was planning to do some more follow-up interviews with them, but unfortunately, John was violently taken out of this world. But he did happily remain close with Yoko over the ensuing 20 plus years or so. They did grow more distant over time, but she was happy to get back in touch with him when he talked about writing the biography, and she even graciously gave him permission sometime before the biography was written to use the title of John's famous song Beautiful Boy for the title of his own memoir about dealing with his son being addicted. And this is just, I do wish, of course, it had been much longer and more detailed, but I just love my doorstoppers, particularly biographies. There haven't really been so many biographies written about Yoko for until fairly recently, and she's such a unfairly pilloried, misunderstood woman. I am prepared, I'm sure some people will leave nasty hate comments and personal attacks against both me and Yoko, because you're oh no, obsessive hatred against a woman in her 90s I've never met. It's been passed down by generational wisdom. I should hate this woman and bash everything about her bad, 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 bad. But screw you if you don't like the subject. You can watch plenty of other videos by me or for other people, and I will delete nasty comments about Yoko and personal attacks about me for liking her. So anyway, let's just start moving on, reading the flap. An intimate and revelatory biography of Yoko Ono from the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Beautiful Boy. John Lennon once described Yoko Ono as the world's most famous unknown artist, and that's, still true to this day, although thankfully in the last 20 plus years or whatever, she has been rediscovered as a wonderful, amazing, pioneering artist she is by, the avant-garde and the conceptual art world. Everybody knows her name, but no one knows what she does. She has only been important to history insofar as she impacted Lennon. Throughout her life, Yoko has been a caricature, curiosity, and often a villain, an inscrutable seductress, manipulating con artist, and caterwauling fraud. I've even seen some people, in all seriousness, claiming she's a literal witch, cuckoo. The Lennon-Beatles saga is one of the greatest stories ever told, but Yoko's part has been missing, hidden in the Beatles' formidable shadow, further obscured by misogyny and racism. You cannot deny this, even if you're not aware of, consciously aware, oh, this is a racist or misogynistic or sexist reason I dislike her, or why I've been told to dislike her, why other people say they dislike her. That doesn't erase its roots in obvious misogyny and racism, and he points out many examples throughout the book. This definitive biography of Yoko Ono's life will change that. In this account, Yoko Ono takes center stage, but you can't fix the haters who are convinced a woman in her 90s they've never ever met or has no idea they exist is the wickedest woman who ever lived. Yoko's life, independent of Lennon, was an amazing journey. Yoko spans from her birth to wealthy parents in pre-war Tokyo, to her harrowing experience as a child during the war, and her arrival in the avant-garde art scenes in London, Tokyo, and New York City. It delves into her groundbreaking art, music, feminism, and activism. We see how she coped under the most intense, relentless, and cynical microscope, as she was falsely vilified for the most heinous cultural crime imaginable. Oh no, the horrors! Breaking up the greatest rock and roll band in history. But that's a complete myth. The Beatles themselves all said she wasn't responsible for it. They were drifting apart anyway. John in particular wanted to leave them, and Mr. Sheff makes the very interesting point in this book, because John was so depressed, didn't want anything to do with the band anymore, but because Yoko stayed with him and loved him and pushed him to continue on and keep going to the studio and making records, she possibly may have prolonged them staying together instead of them breaking up in 66 or 67. So get a new frame of reference. Just think about this from outside. Oh, generational wisdom from 1970 tells me this, and it must be true. I'm not even going to consider there's no sources or reputable scholarly documentation. It's just, oh, some random person said it. Yoko is a moving, propulsive, and vastly entertaining account of a woman whose story has never been accurately told. This work not only rehabilitates Yoko Ono's reputation, but elevates it to iconic status. And unfortunately, some jackwagon at the library, guess what? Yet again, put a sticker over this, and I couldn't find the back flap on Amazon, which is, surprising. Usually it does. So I'm going to, fill in the blanks, context, what I think is hidden under this at the top. In this book, I didn't want to depict Yoko as either a saint or a sinner. Instead, I set out to strip the varnish away. I did my best to accurately construct events and dialogue and report what actually did happen. One thing I didn't have to do is surmise what Yoko Ono is like after decades of friendship. I know what she is like, and I did my best to show it. I'm sorry if I didn't say everything accurately, but I had to guess through context what might be hidden under this. Librarians, please put these markers somewhere where it's not covering up text. Thanks. In these pages, I expose Yoko's missteps and failures. I reveal the depth and sources of her pain and fear. I also show her profound wisdom, wit, humor, inspiration, talent, and joy, her resilience, compassion, her triumphs, and genius. Ultimately, this book is about more than a single person. To borrow from another Beatle, it's also a magical mystery tour through remarkable times and places. It's about how people are hurt and how they change. It's about survival. It's about those who see differently and think differently and suffer because of it. It's about art and creativity and the dream of peace. When I look back on Yoko's 90-plus years, she just turned 92 in February, I see one of the greatest stories of our time, a harrowing, exhilarating, and inspiring journey. So that's, really... Oh, and of course I saw it. That's from the introduction, so I guess I could have looked through the book to read it, but, oh, well, you got the main point. And he's also written a number of other books besides The Beautiful Boy, The Buddhist on Death Row, How One Man Found Light in the Darkest Place, Clean, Overcoming Addiction and Ending America's Greatest Tragedy, and then there's The Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction, All We Are Saying, The Last Major Interview with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, China Dawn, The Story of a Technology and Business Revolution, Game Over, How Nintendo Conquered the World. And this is a really interesting point. Throughout the book, he totally flips it on his head. If you're a Beatles fan or just a person in general, you've probably always referred to the couple or seen them referred to as John and Yoko, because why wouldn't you? The most famous, or at least to most people, the most famous person comes first in the name of a couple, but he always refers to them as Yoko and John, so that makes you step back and realize, oh yeah, Yoko is the main subject here. She's not just the wife of her third husband. She's an amazing artist and woman in her own right, and he goes through. He opens through the prologue. He calls people to call it different names, like introduction, preface, prologue, and so he talks about how she performed one of her conceptual artworks, which is performance art, on March 21st, 1965 at Carnegie Hall in New York, cut piece, and she was starts kneeling on the stage, fully clothed, and she invites people to come up with scissors and each cut off a bit of her clothing, and it's meant to demonstrate how women are so vulnerable in society, and she's just sitting there the entire time, not trying to betray oh, I'm scared these men are totally ripping off my bra now, instead of the women just politely cutting off a few strips of fabric. Oh, the men are much more in your face, voracious, they don't care. Oh, they're removing the undergarments, not just demurely cutting off a little bit. So I'm completely modest. And this is throughout her artistic career, she has had many interactive pieces like that. I know concept or conceptual art is, I like avant-garde art, but even I admit sometimes it can be difficult to understand what exactly is being said, because it's so non-conventional. When you look at fill in the traditional artist of choice, like a Monet or a Degas painting, or even my favorite artist Paul Klee, you see what you're looking at. It's obvious the scene, or if it's abstract like My Love Clay, you can understand, oh, he's trying to do this. Oh, I really like the placement of the colors. But conceptual art and avant-garde art, sometimes it's just oh, a picture of a face in slow motion for 51 minutes. I mean, that I don't think I would ever want to watch that film, 51 minutes of John Lennon's face and just speed it up or slowed down. That's really not the kind of film I want to watch. But for the conceptual, abstract art, in the physical perform in art galleries and stuff, you have to like think outside the box. And for the performance art, like cut piece, you have to use your imagination, which, she famously inspired, was the co-writer of Imagine with John. And that was like many of her like word pieces in Grapefruit, her first book. It asks the reader to imagine letting a goldfish swim across the sky. Imagine 1,000 suns in the sky at the same time. Imagine your head filled with pencil leads. Imagine the clouds dripping. And you're supposed to fill in the blanks yourself, like deliberately, like unfinished music or unfinished artwork. And Mr. Sheff, talks about how a lot of her work as a conceptual, like, artist and musician was inspired because she lived through World War II in Japan. Her family went to the United States when she was like very young, but unfortunately had to, move back around the time like World War II started. Before the attack on Pearl Harbor, there was unfortunately a lot of like, bigotry and racism against the family, and so it was like good they had to leave anyway. But it still wasn't easy being back in Japan. They thought, oh, you were living in America, you must be collaborating with the enemy, and you're so different from us. And she grew up very rich, and there were just so many difficulties, like being torn between two different cultures, like living in like the American world and like later the British world and the Japanese world, but never, sorry, that's my phone, feeling like she completely belonged to any of them, because like just so many different experiences she went through. And when you're out of step with the crowd, that adds to not fitting in. And so anyway, she would tell her younger brother Kay, to like imagine, like whatever, oh, imagine we're eating this wonderful food, a grand smorgasbord of like sushi or whatever other like wonderful like Japanese feasts she could imagine, or they could imagine together. And so they would feel full when they're imagining this, because of like the wartime deprivation. And that really got her in motion to start thinking about conceptual art. And for example, some of her other art pieces are Play It by Trust, which is a completely white chess set. You have to trust the other person isn't cheating you, or like painting to be stepped on, or fly, like climb up top of a ladder and like jump, or like imagine you're flying off, or like the apple, which John famously saw when they met by the Dickens Gallery the night before her show officially opened. He took a bite out of it, and she was horrified. Oh no, that's part of the exhibit, and the apple was just supposed to stay on the table, like gradually, like rotting and molding and withering away, to show the progression of time. And like one of her other, I think it's called Smile, she invited people from all over the world, which now that we have the internet age, it's so much easier than when she first conceived of this piece. I'm back in the 60s, like, oh, I want everyone in the world to submit a picture of themselves smiling, and make it all like combined into a grand master collage of the entire human race smiling. And she also has a piece called My Mummy Was Beautiful, or My Mommy Was Beautiful, depending on which side of the pond the exhibit is in, asking people to submit memories, like whether good or bad, of their mothers. Like Yoko had a difficult relationship with her mother. Her mother never particularly was like interested in being kids, very hands off, and that inspired, sorry, that's the phone again reminding me, that inspired Yoko to feel the same way. Oh, I'm not really ready to be a mother, when she had her daughter Kyoko, and when her son Sean was born. Like, if you're a fan of the Beatles or John Lennon, you pretty much are familiar with the story of how John was the house husband and the primary caregiver of Sean for the first 5 years of life, because Yoko felt like, oh, the woman carries the child for the 9 months, and then like she does all that hard work and like bringing the baby into the world through the labor. But now the husband has to step up and take his part by taking care of the child. And so that her mother's like, I don't know if like emotional coldness is the right word, but she just was, motherhood really isn't my jam. I'm more interested in like like working or having like friendships, or like having a life outside of like hearth and home. I'm not interested in being the wifeykins and mommykins role. So not all women are naturally maternal. Some women don't want children, and some women don't have like lovey-dovey, close-knit Beatrice Sparks type relationships with their mothers. If you've seen my videos on that fraud's books, like that's one thing I rant about all the time. These teen girls are always constantly saying, oh, I'm so glad my dear sweet precious mama is my dear sweet precious mama. That is not Yoko and her mother at all. And so he basically talks about her like childhood, difficult, like growing up between two worlds, and the trauma she had being young during during World War II in Japan. That trauma had a profound influence on a lot of her art as well. And then she got into the art world as well. She was in college in Japan and like dropped out, like the first woman in that philosophy department after like 2 semesters, and her family was like disappointed. And then she went to Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York, which is just above New York City. It's like famous for being like a super progressive college. They don't really have like formal tests or classes or grades like we imagine them. Now, obviously, that's a whole topic for its other thing, but like even Sarah Lawrence College was not progressive enough for her. And even though it did tend to attract like progressive, I'm sorry for saying that word too much, very progressive, like young women from around like the world and the United States, she still didn't quite fit in with that crowd. And they did have some like hoity-toity, like, oh, I have pictures of my horse on my bureau. I'm sorry I had to answer a phone call, but anyway, Mr. Sheff goes on to talk about how Yoko, after dropping out of her second college, got heavily involved in the avant-garde and conceptual art scene in Greenwich Village in the 1960s, and she was a member of the Fluxus group, which had a lot of like, famous avant-garde artists of the era. And they had like a number of loft showings. Like some of them weren't like so successful, but she did obviously have some success doing her like performance pieces, like for example cut piece at the Carnegie Hall, which is like a big major accomplishment for an artist. And even though like many people on the outside were like, this isn't real art, like I don't immediately know what it's saying, well, I don't want to use my brain and think about your intention behind, oh, a white chess set or a painting to be stepped on, any trained monkey could do this. But like people have to think beyond so-called like traditional art, like conceptual art and avant-garde art. They're their own things. They're not meant to be like, the paintings of like angels and landscapes and such. You just have to like put more like thinking into it. Although like, to be fair, like I was reading about her films in this book. I was already aware of the film Bottoms, which the name gives it away. It's people's bare asses. Like, and she also had a film when this cameraman is following a random young woman around Vienna until like, and she's like genuinely terrified. She had no idea she was like forced into a role in this film, and he like follows her like through a cemetery and alleyways into her house, and she falls backwards in terror. The film is called Rape. Like, and she was trying to do this to show like a feminist like perspective. This is what many women like go through. And like another of her films, Fly, this woman is lying like naked on a bed, and there's some kind of like solution on her to get flies attracted, and they're just like walking across her body. And the idea is, oh, this is how women are like objectified in a male dominated society. And if a woman is like bare naked, whatever she looks like, are you going to be looking more at the body parts, or that's a fly, there are flies on her body, that's not, that shouldn't be there. I'm going to pay more attention to the flies and not even that, to kind of tune out the fact that she's naked. And there was two other films I mentioned, one of them with like 51 minutes of John Lennon's face, like speeded, in slow motion. So it was like just originally a short like small length of time like movie, and then she like slowed it down so much so it stretched out to 51 minutes. I'm sorry, that's not a film I ever want to like watch. And this is coming from someone who watched, I think it was about like 50 minutes or so of a silent avant-garde film of just the waves crashing against the ocean, because I like to put as many titles on my list of silence seen possible. There's another film called Self-Portrait, 42 minutes, and this is I don't even have words. I burst out laughing when I read about this film. Sorry, Yoko, but it's just like, wow, like 42 minutes. Another like very slowed down shot of John's semi-erect phallus, and at the end a single drop of like semen comes out. I know YouTube doesn't really like certain words, but I'm probably never going to be monetized, so maybe I've been too conservative about like not saying certain words. I'm told they don't really like. So who wants to watch 42 minutes of a body part, or 51 minutes? I don't care whether it's like the head or like genitals. It's just, who's gonna sit there and watch and think, oh, this is what this is trying to say. Okay, that's cool, but do you really need 51 minutes to do that? And like, it's kind of funny, they also made a film together called Erection, which that's not the phallus film, that's called Self-Portrait. The film called Erection is about like the erection of a building over time. So like their films are kind of a little bit too out there for me. And he talks about, her music, what inspired it, and like it wasn't just like random like screaming. I know it's popular for a lot of people to say, oh, all she did was tape loops and screaming, but like there's actual intent behind the certain types of noises she's making, like caterwauling, like wailing from her heart and soul about like, oh, the war in Vietnam, or she's had like miscarriages, or her like traumatic like experiences in World War II Japan, like her difficult marriages, like she was married 3 times. It's not just, oh, I'm just gonna randomly scream and scream and scream. That's just actually try to listen to it and see the intent. And I did a few weeks ago because I read this book. Finally, I mean, I know it's been taken so long already, but thanks to Spotify, I could finally access them without like buying them. The 3 unfinished music albums Yoko and John did in the late '60s. I think it was like all. I think they were all in 1968 release. Of course, like Two Virgins, the famous when they're stark naked on the front, and on the back it's them naked from the other side. That caused a huge furor, and it was like put butcher paper over like everything but the faces when it was in stores. And then there was Life with the Lions, or Life with Lions #2. That's the most, wow, that was, well, I think the wedding album, that's, I mean, it's kind of like a hard race, like which one is like the worst. Like I would never want to listen to it again, but I think Two Virgins, relatively speaking, is like the most, I guess, listenable. But I'm not gonna listen to any of them again. Like wedding album, the first track is 26 minutes of Yoko and John just saying one another's names, like, shouting, like screaming, like whispering, like saying it with different types of emotions. Like, why would you, I mean, that's cool if that you want to do that for your own like musical experiment for your personal collection, but like why would a mainstream audience want to listen to that more than once or at all? I mean, I understand the intent behind the he does explain the intent behind the pieces. I wouldn't even call them songs so much on the unfinished music albums, but again, I that's just like way over my head, even for someone who does like and have more of an open mind towards avant-garde stuff. And he talks about John and Yoko's lives together after they were married, and like their difficulties in New York when they were being shadowed by Nixon and the FBI, particularly because of the like drug bust they'd had in the UK a while ago. And then the like the anti-Vietnam stuff. Oh no, we've got to follow them, they must be dangerous radicals. And then the Lost Weekend when Yoko like kicked John out and said like, I need to work on myself. Hey John, I still love you, but you're cheating on me like at a party. Like everyone heard you having sex with this other chick with the thin walls on the bed where everyone's coats were, and nobody could leave the party because you were like screwing on that bed. And so she realized that their relationship was in trouble, and like John needed to like clear his head, she needed to clear her head and become more independent and things like that. And talks about the growing relationship they had prior to getting married, and debunks a lot of the myth. Like people say like, oh, Yoko was wearing Cynthia's bathrobe when Cynthia came home and saw them after they had had sex for the first time and made 2 virgins. No, she was not wearing Cynthia's like bathrobe. And also like people are all calling Yoko the homewrecker. Well, guess what, she was also married, so wouldn't John have been a homewrecker, like equally, like breaking up her second marriage? And the custody battle for her daughter Kyoko, and how the second husband Tony just like took Kyoko despite Yoko having the custody order from courts, and just like basically disappeared for decades. And of course the tragedy of John's murder, and how Yoko made the album Season of Glass. As Sean said, that was her mourning. People are saying, oh, why aren't you wearing black for like 5 years like a Victorian, and you're making music already? Well, that was her mourning. Not everyone expresses like grief and trauma in the exact same way, and how like her art has had a lot of new retrospectives in recent decades, and she's become a huge surprise hit in the dance music world. And a lot of like people in like punk rock and avant-garde, just outside of the mainstream pop type of music world, they have really been inspired by her own music. I mean, of course it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. She doesn't have the most classically trained voice, but it's like what she's trying to say, and she's like experimenting with different kinds of like music, different like atonal singing instruments, making really important statements about like feminism and inequality and classism and just other big important societal issues. She's never intended to be like a pop artist, although her songs with John on double fantasy and Milk and Honey are much more like mainstream than many people might associate with her, and just like so many like really really fascinating things I learned about Yoko throughout this book. And as I did mention in the beginning, this video is completely unscripted. She faced a lot of sexism and racism because of her relationship with John. Like people like say like, oh, it's not sexism and racism because, and they proceed to say like things that are very very obviously sexist and racist and misogynistic because it's so like baked into like society they're not even aware of this. Like for example, like would people have like so many complaints about Yoko regardless of like who she like had relationships with if she were a man? Like just seriously, I'll be honest, like she probably wouldn't have like, oh, she's just randomly screaming and doing like, oh, imagine this, imagine that, that's not art. Well, people might say okay, that's maybe pretentious mental masturbation, whatever, but they wouldn't attack a man nearly so like violently and like nastily for doing it, like bringing personal appearance into it. And if John had, hooked up with like a statuesque, like blonde white woman after divorcing Cynthia, would people have like gotten nearly as angry at Yoko about that? Like, would they still like accuse her of like breaking up a band if she were just like a white woman, or even a more like someone who fit, I guess, the popular conception of, oh, the beautiful geisha type of Japanese woman, like, like passive and staying well in the background instead of like coming to the studio with John all the time and doing like her own thing. And oh no, a Japanese woman, oh, she's screaming instead of being quiet. Oh no, that's a huge no-no. And I bookmarked a piece of like shocking racism. It's like my jaw dropped open. Racist and sexist comments on, oh wait, okay, oh god, I guess I'll go back a little bit further. This is like really really pointing out the thing, this whole paragraph. Yoko and John were bolstered by the experience of making the albums, but they were stung by the continued attacks from the press and public. When the two went out, fans yelled for Yoko to go back to her own country. John received racist letters, including ones warning him Yoko would slit his throat as he slept. They called her a JAP, Dragon Lady, and other slurs. The racism and misogyny behind Yoko's denigration over the years can't be overstated. Artist and writer Kate Millett, Yoko's friend from the 1960s Greenwich Village scene and author of Sexual Politics, told me, outside Japan, Yoko is the most famous Japanese person who ever lived, but being a strong feminist, she never fit the stereotype of the obedient, passive Asian wife or the seductive geisha. She got in people's faces and screamed. People didn't like a person from Japan screaming, and they didn't like a woman screaming. A screaming Japanese woman enraged them. Indeed, one reason Yoko was attacked with such vitriol from the start was that she didn't look like other rock and roll girlfriends or wives, the Bond girls, supermodels, and Playboy playmates, nor did she act like them. The New York Times' Amanda Hess wrote, her image stands in contrast to that of other Beatles partners, model-esque white women in chic outfits who occasionally swoop in with kisses, nod encouragingly, and slip unobtrusively away. Racist and sexist comments on Yoko's looks and work continue to appear in the press. One of the most blatant examples came in December 1970 in Esquire magazine to publicize the Plastic Ono records, and, as John was wont to do, to steer attention from himself towards Yoko. They had granted interviews, including an in-depth one for Esquire, for a feature on Yoko, and get ready to be shocked. The article became famous not for journalist Charles McCary's comprehensive interview, but for the blatantly racist title and illustration. The title, John Rennan's Exclusive Gloopy. This is 1970. The subtitle extended the slur. On the load to Briss with the Yoko Nobody Onos. The illustration was a full-page caricature of Yoko, wild-haired and domineering, holding a miniature beetle with 2 E's, or beetle, capital A, like the band spelling, on a leash. It had John's face, and like another person was like, chastised for doing an interview of Yoko that was too like positive, and this person like didn't want to run the interview because that she was like, or he was requested to do by the magazine because like they didn't want to make Yoko sound like a villain, like the magazine was trying to do. Oh no, you actually liked her, we can't have that at all. Thank you very much for watching all the way through to the end, and please leave a respectful comment letting me know like, what have you read this book, what are your opinions on Yoko's conceptual art? Like, even if it might not be your personal cup of tea, can you at least like try to understand the message and the themes she's trying to express in a very like unconventional way? Are you into like conceptual or on avant-garde types of art or film or music. Like, what did you think of those like films I described? Like the face and the erection for like 42 minutes. Seriously, that's a bridge too far even for me. Or have you read any other biographies of Yoko you would recommend? So just leave me like nice, respectful comments. Remember, like nasty hate comments get you deleted and blacklisted. So thanks again for watching. Bye.